Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff, for the introduction. Kudos on such a great event as well. And thank you all for joining. We're so pleased to have Friends of Delaware serve as our coalition state lead and work with all of you across the basin on our watershed-wide goals. Today, I want to talk a little bit about a marriage between federal policy and statewide work and how we can all work together to support this great effort. So as Jeff mentioned, my name is Kelly Knudsen. I'm serving as the interim director for the Coalition of Delaware Watershed, and that's housed within New Jersey Audubon's Government Relations Office in Trenton. So before we dive into today's content on the American Rescue Plan, I'll just start by sharing more about the coalition and who we are. At the end, certainly happy to take questions, but feel free to put any of that you have in the chat box as we go along. So the coalition, we unite over 160 different organizations throughout 4 basin states in the watershed. That's New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, all with a goal to preserve and protect this natural resource through policy, outreach, and collaboration. So our member organizations that are composed of the coalition, which includes Friends of Delaware, they range from your watershed education groups to those national affiliates with an environmental policy focus. And together, collectively, we advance policies that are rooted in science to promote clean drinking water for the 13.3 million residents throughout the basin that depend on the Delaware watershed. We also leverage our members to advance clean water and conservation priorities on both the federal and state level. So on the state level, one of our priorities across the basin is to ensure that the American Rescue Plan dollars goes towards stormwater and land conservation projects. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that work today. And for us, it's just really vital to advance projects that further help us protect our drinking water, community health, and economic prosperity as well. So I'm excited to be here with you all, and again, appreciate you joining the presentation. So I'll advance. So first I want to discuss what is the American Rescue Plan and how these funds can be used for particular projects across the region. So for starters, just here's some brief background on the passage of the American Rescue Plan and the intended uses of it as well. So the US House of Representatives, they passed the Senate amended HR 1319. It's the American Rescue Plan Act, and that was signed by President Biden on March 11th of 2021, so earlier this spring. The American Rescue Plan, it provides $1.9 trillion in additional relief to respond to the novel coronavirus, otherwise known as COVID-19. And this follows the enactment of nearly $4 trillion in COVID relief dollars that were provided in 2020. So President Biden, he called for Congress to enact the American Rescue Plan to really provide relief for individuals and businesses struggling due to the pandemic, as well as to achieve other priorities from the administration and Congress. So the American Rescue Plan, it includes provisions on aid to state and local government, kind of focusing on hardest hit industries and communities, tax changes affecting individuals and businesses, along with other provisions. So within the American Rescue Plan, the Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, they're going to provide $350 billion for states, municipalities, counties, tribes, and territories, and include about $130 billion for local governments, and that's split evenly between municipalities and counties. And the funding from the American Rescue Plan, it can really be utilized to invest in infrastructure, and that includes water, sewer, and broadband services, and any project that could really be funded under the Clean Water State Revolving Fund or the Drinking Water Revolving Fund. Those projects are eligible for these funds. In a couple of slides, I'll just go in more depth, of course, of what kind of specific projects are eligible, just to give you all a greater insight through the state revolving funds. I will say it's worth mentioning that local governments have until the end of 2024 to obligate the American Rescue Plan money and through 2026 to spend it all down. So there is some time to receive it and spend. Half of the funding is going to be sent out in 2021, and the other half is 18 months after the first payment's been allocated. So again, this is an incredible, unprecedented funding opportunity to really not only address much needed infrastructure upgrades, but also to spur state economies that have been really hit hard by the pandemic and the COVID-19. So to assist member organizations that are part of our coalition, we created an advocacy and outreach toolkit around the American Rescue Plan. And we can share that with all of you too and make sure that you get a link to it. Again, it helps a lot of good resources, communication and outreach tools to really have you be successful messengers on behalf of the American Rescue Plan. And then you can always modify those to fit your local needs, requests, projects, et cetera. So our hope really is that, with proper preparation and planning, a portion of these funds can be invested in long-term capital upgrades. And that's going to deliver both, immediate and long-term lasting benefits. Now more than ever, there's a clear need for investments in infrastructure and stormwater, especially with the rise of, storms like Ida and Henry that have hit the regions recently. So I will mention too that many organizations and industries are competing for local government's attention, right? We're not the only ones advocating for clean water. Others are out there advocating for childcare, for hospital relief, education funds, et cetera. But at the coalition, we believe that, conservationists, we have a really compelling case for prioritizing local government dollars. And it's certainly worth noting that, other advocates are going to be advocating for that money to be spent elsewhere, again, essential workers, schools, hospitals, et cetera. So with that said too, the proposed American Rescue Plan projects, they don't need to directly be related to supporting public health, addressing the negative economic impacts caused by the public health emergency, or serve the hardest hit industries. So water infrastructure projects under the infrastructure eligibility category, they do need to align again with the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund eligibilities that were provided by the Environmental Protection Fund, EPA. So I'm happy to dive into that a little bit more. We can discuss what types of projects are eligible under these SRF categories. Let me see if it advances. Perfect. So there are 11 project categories under the Clean Water SRF and 6 under the Drinking Water SRF. And the coalition is really excited by these categories because by investing in water infrastructure, we can meet the demands for safe, accessible water and sewer services in the face of the issues that we're receiving today. So the coalition, we really call for further attention to antiquated infrastructures that manage stormwater, such as combined sewer systems that directly diminish water quality overall. And through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, states in the watershed, they can really invest in upgrading outdated and again, antiquated stormwater and drinking water infrastructure, which can really go a long way to protecting local businesses, create jobs, and protect public health, which is of course, really important to the upper Delaware region. So under the Clean Water SRF, eligible projects include to construct, improve, and repair wastewater treatment plants, control non-point sources of pollution, improve resilience of infrastructure to severe weather events, creating green infrastructure, manage and treat stormwater as subsurface drainage water, facilitate water reusage, and of course, protect water bodies from pollution. And as you all know, severe weather and flooding and other associated climate impacts have become more common. So, threatening the lives of millions of dollars in property damage and value loss. So these major risks kind of strain the adaptive capacity that we all have to mitigate these hazards, pronounce social inequalities, and require significant and coordinated investment to really alleviate the impacts that are mentioned. And then through the Clean Water SRF, entities, they're able to make long-term investments in critical infrastructure to protect clean water and natural resources, again, the issues that we're facing here today. Moving along, the Drinking Water SRF eligible projects include building or upgrading facilities and transmission, distribution, and storage systems, supporting the consolidation or really establishment of clean water systems, and replacing lead service lines. So ultimately, smart and coordinated investments in our essential water and infrastructure can drive the needed public and private investments into our communities, improve the water quality, reduce public health disparities, and remove any toxic contaminants that may ultimately appear, and hopefully help us secure that clean drinking water message for all. The Environmental Protection Agency has actually developed in-depth resources that cover each of these eligibilities. I'm happy to include those in the chat or as a follow-up from today's conversation as well. So please stay tuned for those. So moving along, I just wanted to highlight what the American Rescue Plan could mean for 3 out of the 4 watershed states. And those are going to focus on New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. So in New York, there's nearly about 13 billion allocated to the state, and that's being overseen by the state's coronavirus recovery fund. There's a lot of money still available to local governments. And in total, New York State has actually only spent about 400 million of the American Rescue Plan dollars that they've received. So there's certainly an opportunity for all of us to advocate for projects in the upper Delaware to be funded that support these initiatives. The new governor, Governor Hochul, she also vocalized her commitment towards working with state agencies like DEC and others to ensure that a lot of these funds go towards environmental protection, recreation, tourism, and other related projects. So we're excited by that. Certainly hope that we can work with the new governor, state agencies to ensure that recreation, environmental protection, and tourism do receive some of these dollars in New York State. And happy to work with all of you on the call and of course our partners across the region and what that advocacy and approach looks like as well. Moving along, we have the American Rescue Plan. It delivered a total of 10.2 billion to New Jersey, so just under what New York received. And that includes 6.4 billion for the state and 3.6 billion to local governments for a lot of the purposes that we've already discussed. And about a third of the money in New Jersey had already been allocated to assist with like eviction prevention, small business recovery, and trauma centers across the state. So what's interesting about New Jersey is that a lot of the state's water infrastructure funding, it's going to go into the New Jersey Water Bank program. And that provides loans to governments directly. And the New Jersey program, it does not support all of the allowed uses of the federal funds, but these include like the decentralized wastewater system septics, watershed pilot projects, and non-point sources, just for a couple of examples there. But however, the US Treasury, they did indicate that for water projects, municipalities and counties, they have to comply again with the eligible activities that were previously discussed by the EPA. So in other words, municipalities and counties can use these funds more flexibly, which is great, rather than restrictive uses for state water infrastructure programs. And then in New Jersey, again, to receive these funds, the local governments, they have to apply for specific projects. They're not automatically awarded those directly. We've been working with the governor's office in New Jersey just to submit testimony and make sure that we are indicating particular sources of projects be included through the American Rescue Plan dollars there. And they're going to continue to have like listening sessions with folks in the state to hear the needs from the communities. So moving along, lastly to Pennsylvania, the American Rescue Plan, it provided about $7 billion to Pennsylvania counties, townships, boroughs, and cities, and land conservation, waterway restoration, et cetera. So investments in parks and other public outdoor recreation spaces were considered. And we, of course, are very supportive of that moving forward as well. So in Pennsylvania, though, which is different from the others, it's going to be spent, a lot of the dollars that they receive towards backfilling lost tax revenue, but a large chunk of the money can be used towards new community investments as well. So I just want to cover one more slide before wrapping up my points. I realize that I'm almost out of time here. So in addition to like the state surplus, the proposed federal infrastructure package could offer even more funding if passed. So while we have our eyes on the American Rescue Plan and the dollars that we could receive locally there, there's also this huge package being discussed on the Hill, which you've probably all heard about with the infrastructure package. So in August, the Senate passed the infrastructure package. We're still waiting on the House, but there's several components that accelerate the nation's progress on clean water that we're excited about. And they include, certainly not limited to, 26 million for projects in the Delaware River Basin, about 132 million for the National Estuaries Program over 5 years, and then another 5 years of supplemental funding for the state revolving funds. So again, even more money going a long way to implementing, on-the-ground restoration projects that will improve water quality, resilience, habitat, and public access, but also again, sustain and create jobs throughout the region, which is of course really important. And we certainly look forward to working with the entire regional Congress delegation and the administration just to get this legislation passed and signed into law. So hopefully we'll have really good news to share and more money will be on the way. But with that said, I will end, and I'm happy to take any questions unless you have to transition to the next topic.
Thank you, Kelly. It looks like one question did come in through the chat box. It says, in New York State, of the 12.75 billion, what portion is earmarked for projects related to tourism, recreation, environmental protection?
Yeah, that's certainly a question that we can follow up on. Just from my initial research, I didn't see a particular allocation of funds for environmental protection, tourism, recreation. That's something certainly that we can follow up with the governor's office or other agencies to figure out and send that information around to folks.
Thank you.
Is that it for questions, Molly?
Yes, it is.
Great. Well, Kelly, thank you so much. We really appreciate the partnership with CDRW.